Okay. Oh, I thought you were already recording. So
No, we
let's
don't have more personal business.
okay. Call to order. And let's prove today's agenda and the minutes from our last meeting. And if you haven't looked at the minutes lately, you can I've got all these things I ought to turn off that popped up. They're really easily either read or you can watch them. So
Yeah.
anybody want to prove that? Oh, hell, goodness gracious. I mean, there's not enough of us. So let's carry on. Is it okay though? Have y'all seen the agenda? Mike's got it up. But you
Yeah, I can see it.
okay. And um do you approve it, Mark? You think it's okay?
Yeah, I can't look at it while I'm driving.
Oh, you will. Excuse me. I thought you pulled over.
Right.
Okay, Amy is not available today. She's indisposed. That's all I'm gonna say. No, she's ill. And then our meeting dates are it's January 19th at 5 p.m. At Frankie's Mexican Cuisine. No, it's
Yes.
Dos Arroyos,
Yes.
2701 Custer Parkway.
Correct.
So it's wrong on the agenda. So the address is correct.
I'll need to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. He told me it was off Custer.
Well,
So
we'll send out reminders.
yeah.
And then the most important thing that we need to do today is get look at this board of directors. Mike's gone. Okay. So let me just read them off, guys. And Mike had to go to a meeting at 12. So Josh Good's
I'm
turn.
here. I'm here.
I meant Levy
Oh, okay. Sorry.
because he could post that these officers. And what I'll do is I'll send them out, but I'm just going to read them off. It was Josh Good, Susan Henson. Josh was president. I was vice president. Jesse was secretary. Amy was treasurer. Blake one with Dallas. Jonathan with Javorkic. I'll slaughter that. I'm sorry, Jonathan. With the city of Dallas. Preston with Dallas. Steve Hauser with the Borological. Steve's gonna be in late today. So he said he had a tree update. Mark Boating, Christopher Rasmussen, and Mike Sills. We lost Sarah, and Michael has taken her place. We voted him in. We have not replaced the position. We replaced Josh with me after. Yeah, I took Josh's place. And Mark took my place. So we have one spot open if everyone on our board will re-engage. Any comments?
Hold on a second. Go ahead.
A lot to take in, isn't it? When you're driving.
Susan, it's Steve Hauser. I'm here just so that you know.
Oh, there you are, Stephen. I just mentioned you. So we're down at we make a note that the name on that restaurant that we're going to, Steve, is changed. On the agenda, it's called Frankie's, but it's Dos Arroyos. I think that's how you say it. Anyway, And then we were just talking about the board of directors. That's when your name came up. And I had read it off saying, if everybody re-ups, we just have one position to fill.
I was filling in, I think, for Dennis Hopper. Remember Dennis Hopper was stepping down, you asked me to step in, and I told you I would do what I could, but probably couldn't make it to all the meetings.
Right. And you've done an excellent job. You've been supportive. All right.
I got a comment. It's Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was talking to Mark Cruzy yesterday down in San Antonio, and they asked him to be vice president of their association. And in the past, I didn't think we could do those things, but looks like he hadn't had any blowback from
Up
our,
above.
our folks. So if I'm willing to put my name in the hat, unless, and if I get some blowback, if Mark gets blowback from Mac or Bill, who it's over him down there, then I'll let you know.
Oh, okay. Get that down there. Bulletin.
For VP.
Okay. And then I'll put that together and send it to Mark to approve, and we need to get that out as soon as possible. We need to find some replacements.
I was gonna ask Susan, are we gonna look for one or two replacements for the board?
Yes.
Okay. Do we want to, I mean, I've got probably one or two we can ask unless somebody else has other options.
Please send those to us, Blake. And
Okay.
in addition, well, I'll add that in at the end. The training that I attended yesterday on that equity analyzer.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good.
Awesome tool. I mean, you can go down to the block. But they have it, and they've got layer upon layer upon layer. Not just heat, but population density, the population. I mean, everything. How many trees are there? And then you can put in how many trees you want to put in there, the percentage of effect it'll have, in these certain areas. And then you put in the number of trees and it'll tell you what it'll equal. I mean, I can't even explain it. I'd have to pull it up and go through it all again. It's very extensive, but it's a tool through American Forest. So it's at American Forest Tree Equity Score .org / no, I'll have to send it out. Because then it's like / something, and then I think it's analysis and then / Dallas. So please, you know anything about that, Steve?
I hadn't heard anything about it.
It's pretty cool. And the American Forest has already done the whole United States. But they narrow in on areas, and add in specific layers that you want. It's pretty cool. So there's more to come on that. Okay. Well, I know y'all got a lot to do. It's December. Let's keep going. The bilingual workshop, this is really clicking along. Mike, if you know anything else, or Mark, we lost Mark. Okay. If you know anything else, please add in. the bilingual workshop, Amy, Mark, Mike, myself, the date is in North Texas. The date is, and the name is North Texas Printing and Safety Workshop. In San Antonio's is the 22nd. So we're first. And then locations, the Texas AgriLife Center, the name is the North Texas Printing and Safety Workshop. Amy was in the process of confirming all the speakers. As soon as that's done, and that was going to be done by January 1st, we were going to meet, we'd have the agenda, and everything would go out. And Mike Sills and Mark Boating are going to do AV. Registration is done through ISAT. Thank you, Megan.
Welcome.
Can you guys hear me now?
Huh?
Can you guys hear me? I've been having
Yes,
trouble.
sir. All right, we hear you now.
5x5.
Okay. Sorry about that.
And then volunteers, so probably need volunteers for like on-site vendor coordination. That's just one person, or on-site registration / information, breakfast snacks. That's Mark. Set up and tear down. We could help you with that, Mark. The volunteers. And then just at the venue, we can use people inside and out, picking up, cleaning up, whatever. It depends on how many people we have, but those are just ideas because people wanted to know what they could volunteer for.
Right.
And then sponsors and vendors, Chris Rasmussen and Preston, they're both on it. I talked to them this week. So they made several contacts. And then lunch is Rainbow. Mark's doing that, coordinating that. Budget for speakers and travel, all that will come up after we know. The agenda's set in January. I'll get the gifts for the speakers. Travel arrangements are Mr. Mark in San Antonio, Mike here, Mark Boating in Plato, and backup speaker could be Chris Rasmussen. Any questions?
Nope.
Is that too fast?
How much money are we going to be, you think we'd be pulling in? That's my question per person.
I don't
have-
know. No, I mean, I haven't been told that. I think they charge, I think she said $100. Isn't that right, Mike?
90 or 105.
Yeah, I think it's around $100 and then $15 per person goes to ISA.
Right,
Then minus food and snacks.
I think
Right.
Although Rainbow is giving us food, but we still need to pay for snacks and stuff like that, and travel arrangements for speakers and stuff like that.
I think we were debating it and I was like, just charge whatever's whatever San Antonio is charging. I don't know why we.
right. That was, and we said we were going to address that after we knew what the budget was at that January meeting.
Yeah. And Mike Stills, does Mark Cruzy do this every year? Is this an event they do every year?
Yes.
Good. So
The San
If we could-
Antonio Arborist Association.
yeah, that's what we want. So we want to piggyback every year off of this.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
try to,
we
bring
hope.
some income in every year.
Yeah, we hope they'll invite us back. Anyway,
Yeah, well, we got to make sure we do a good job of accommodating everybody and make them want to come back,
for sure.
you know?
Yes, sir. That's the whole point. Make it inviting. Under old business, are we ready to move on, guys? Okay. Shade keeper training. The second class. We had 10 people in it. but February 3rd is the second class at Gateway Community Center, and we're gonna prune fruit trees. And then we'll add additional training to areas as requested under the shade keeper training, but it's as, Mike's pointed out to us that it needs to be tapered to each community, but they need to reach out, and then like they're doing, we need to do the best to help them. And then I thought Chris was gonna, Rasmussen was gonna join us today, so we don't really have an update on saluting branches. He told me 70 people.
So,
70
Yeah.
people. But we don't have
do we have another location besides that one, just out of curiosity?
yeah, I
Oh.
think we're talking about moving over to another cemetery.
I feel like we've kind of exhausted that cemetery, at least for a couple years, and then come back.
Oh yeah. It has to be, a planned approach. You can't do it all in 1 year or 2 years, but you have to let them rest too.
Well, we don't. I mean, I don't think we necessarily have to stay in Dallas. Unless Chris was really adamant on that. We don't have anything in Plano, but if there's opportunity to go to other
Well,
cities as well, I think we should be
Can
open
you
to
do
it.
the support, Mark?
What's
you have
that? The support?
You have the equipment?
No. Well, in Plano, we don't have any memorial cemeteries.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we have a memorial park, but it's all new trees anyway. So it just got renovated. So we started from a blank slate. But I just wanted to throw it out there that we should be open to.
Explore new sites.
Yeah.
Then we can reach out.
Yeah, Chris and I walked around, Chris McMasters and I walked around last year in September or so, and or August, we have quite a few other cemeteries that we can look at.
Good.
So, and I think really the only requirement is that a veteran is buried there. It doesn't have to be memorialized. It doesn't have to be anything like that.
No, just a
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sure a cemetery in Plano will work, just FYI.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know the requirement.
Well, you get it approved.
Sure, I
There's a
see.
committee. And anyway.
I can look into it.
No, it's Chris's Rasmussen is our contact. He's on that committee. So
I'll contact him then.
Yeah, and he'll get back with you. He's supposed to be on today. I don't know what's going on. Because
I think it will be nice though, next year, the tree conference is the week after, so they won't coincide and we can actually like celebrate both respectfully.
Hallelujah.
Hey, that's nice.
That's good news. Merry Christmas.
There we go.
Right. That needs to go out in an email blast. Okay. So we'll move on to EAB. What do you got, Blake?
I honestly, I don't have anything. I'm kind of out of that business, honestly.
Okay.
I think we need to maybe bring in some other City of Dallas folks that kind of more or less taken that over, if we would like.
Who?
So Eric, he's one of the foresters. You probably know Eric Wettengill. He's kind of taking it over.
Yes.
But with that being said, I'm not sure there's actually any movement for EAB. I mean, I could try and get an update through, Brett or Chris or someone, but I just really haven't heard anything as far as treating trees or classifying more trees in the park system.
Okay. Well,
And I know, Karen, on the other hand, for DWU has been doing a lot of work on her end too.
okay. Karen, I should reach out to her anyway.
People are still planting ash. We have a new park going in at Collin Creek Mall, and the majority of the trees they wanted to plant was ash. So we had to put our foot down on that.
Yeah,
It's
they
amazing.
want to line they're going to new sign for City Hall. They're going to put sycamores in all the way up down. No. Anyway,
You know,
well, good job. Defender of the good.
that's right.
So, web update, Michael, anything?
No, not a whole lot. It's been pretty much just probably be revamping the calendar portion of the site a little bit. Been having some trouble with some of the updates on there. We're going to try to make it a little bit easier for some of our reoccurring things are not changing easily. So I'm going to revamp it just a little bit. That'll be a little bit clearer for the new year. That's my main thing I'll be working on right now. But the site itself is doing real well. Probably will need some bios from a few folks whenever we. And I apologize for being out just a little bit earlier, but whenever we finalize all of the board directors and officers, we started getting just a few
For our signature.
Yeah, for the about us page for all of our for officers, I can
Yeah.
all of our info.
There are some other things I want to talk to you about it, but we won't do it here. It's just so that things I saw on the site.
Okay.
But this looks great. You're doing a wonderful job. Don't y'all think so?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's coming along.
Okay, and then on social media we have, what platforms are we going to have through the website, and then we really, what platforms can we reach on the website, Mike? Through one post.
Yeah. We need to figure out, because I think the last time we talked about this, we didn't know who had access to each individual social media platform. And we were going to try to figure out we need someone to try to figure that out. We need someone to step up and figure out who's, if we need a password reset, but what we probably need to do is have it be a generic TBUFC email, so it's not attached to someone's name.
Yeah, I can certainly create one with our new account and then just make it where we can kind of reset it. But as far as the social media, I have no access at all. I don't know if that's something that Chris Rasmussen has or.
Well, I know that I think Sarah was doing something. Jesse, I need to call Jesse, and I will right after this, leave a message. And then there was what's his name that works with Karen, the beard, heavyset, like he works with Karen Woodard.
Can we change our username that's on?
Wait a minute. Do you know that guy's name? Well, I need to write it down. Okay, go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
No, I just don't know. I don't know social media very well, but I don't know if we changed the username login, to TBUFC or not. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. If it's somebody that started an account with their name, maybe we just start a brand new.
Right.
There's probably a way to change it if
all I have to do is call Jessie. She'll remember.
Yeah.
Because everybody, it was all done through Dallas personnel.
Okay.
And then we still need a chairman for that. but we can address that in the future unless
Yeah.
someone wants to step up now. Oh, that we're gonna see what we do first. We're gonna check first.
Steps
Okay.
up, we'll just sign it, you know?
Apparently Mike and Mark have been out just cooking on this committee, and I'm sorry, Mike, I left you off that agendas on that. Anyway, committee personnel, who all's on that committee? There's you, me, and Mike. I'm sorry I missed that meeting.
And that, sorry, what committee is it?
UFMP,
Yeah.
Urban Forestry Management Planning Workshop.
Yep. So what we decided is that we're gonna wait till probably April or May to do the next workshop.
Okay.
We've already got our 4 topics that we want to talk about. This is going to be more of an in-house kind of workshop this time around, using the people we have, with possibly one speaker coming in.
I think this American Forest would pull.
Oh, getting them to come?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
I mean,
Yep.
it's I was amazed, and we used it. We all went on and used it, and made sure we knew how to use it.
We don't have a set date yet, but I think that that target date of April to May is good. And in January, what I'd like to do is figure out how many more workshops we're going to do the rest of the year. You know, ideally 4. So if we do the Spanish English in February, do one in May, do another one in August, and another one like in November.
Well,
I think that kind of spreads it out good, but we'll talk about that another
yeah,
time.
but we'll do that at the retreat.
Yeah. But as far as the update for that one, yeah, May.
Okay.
We've got the topics. We'll probably just revisit it in January when we're getting closer to the date.
Awesome. And
Can I speak
This-
to that?
yes, sir.
Mike, go ahead.
So a portion of that program was on grants. And what I've been trying to do is, as I get information that I can share, I've been pushing that to Michael Levy so that he can push it onto the portal and the website and get the word out that way. So I'm trying to use TBUFC to do as a channel to do that.
That's awesome.
And so with these communities that we've been reaching out to and working with on the, through these workshops, they are right now, they are on a call with the Forest Service on trying to get their head around these grants. And so the information that I've been pushing to Mike is reach these communities. And part of that information was a link and a registration to get on a meeting to have this explained to them. And so that piece is going on as we speak. And it's probably be in a different portion of the agenda. I guess once we create a grants committee, but what you're talking about, Susan, with the that tool to find out where to plant trees, I actually have a list of 6 communities where that work has already been done for me back in College Station, and they're pushing this out. There are 6 communities. I'll just run through them right quick. It's Commerce, Corsicana, Gainesville, Kaufman, Seagoville, and Terrell. Terrell and Corsicana being the 2 primary cities to focus on as we reach out to them and go over the potential for grants and what and explore what part TBUFC can play with that whole grant thing going on. I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that too. Mike and I met on Tuesday, or yeah, was it Tuesday, Mike? And we went over the entire grant process. It looks like it's a 1-to-1 match up to 50% of the total amount. So some of the grants might be a little bit challenging to do, but I think there's quite a few of them, Mike, that we can probably get into. And Mike's already got that connection with the cities. So, you know, we were talking about trying to bring in money to TBUFC through workshops. And then I think this grant opportunity is a really, really good opportunity where we could be that gap, that bridge with these cities to help them do the grants and bring in money as well.
Awesome. That's what we're supposed to do. Thank you guys. Wonderful job. Mike's working it, so that's cool. Y'all keep it up. Let's see. Anything else, guys, on that? Okay.
No, I think Mike's going to be reaching out to some of these communities. I know they have like 10 grants for Tree City USA at 10 grand a piece. They have some grants that are actually for the beautifying school campuses. They have one that's for a community a city forester. I think that's 100,000 grand over 3 years. So I think there's some opportunity there. I know like Dallas Community College expressed wanting to get a forester or possibly doing some kind of beautification on some of their campuses. So I think there's
with that.
I think there's an easy path that way. I think the challenge is going to be the way the grants are written is that the cities are going to have to come up with the money up front, and it's more of a rebate program of about 50%. So that's going to be the biggest hurdle, I think, in any of these grants.
All right. And Mike, Sills, I didn't realize there was a conflict between that application and what the Forest Service had. So
No conflict. I mean, it always pays to have many tools in the toolbox, but there's no conflict.
well, it just gives you more information, details, facts to support what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's maybe geared to the layman.
Yeah.
Within the Forest Service, we got all this. I've got we have people we can go to. They can pull this stuff up pretty easy. But for the lay person, having a one-stop shop where they can go get this information, that's good. We have things like that in our forest information portal, but not. I'm not familiar with the tool. I sat through a little bit of that yesterday, but it's just like I said, it's another tool.
Anyway, more the better. Take all the information you can get. So we lost Steve.
I do want to say, I'd like to say one more thing about those grants. They I want these I got to reach out to these folks regardless, but I leave that an open door for anyone with TBUFC that wants to go with me and be representative of TBUFC to explain what these are and explain how we can help. And I do that to be transparent. I've already had in contacting these folks through email. I've already had an email go out to non-city folks, and they wrote me back and said, well, where are the grants for us? Where's the grants for the private guy? You know, and so I said, well, you know, there are grants for the private guy. And you are welcome to join us, our TBUFC, as we go out and seek to help these communities with it by being you know, helping to administer these grants.
Right.
Yeah.
That works. We just have
So-
to do it.
So the invitation is there. You know, you want to join me, and maybe Mark can go out there. But if you want to join us, just let us know. And we're trying to strike while the iron's hot, and you know that means in the next week or so.
Yeah, Mike, I'll go with you. I think the deadline for application is February 14th or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So I think maybe trying to hit these maybe this, you know, next week, or at least a couple of the ones that you have a really, really good connection with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
And let
not
'em-
in the past. I've actually just gone over and done a cold call, you know. But
Yeah.
we kind of call them beforehand, you know, kind of give them a heads up. But you know, we can rattle this off pretty quick. I mean, I'm pretty open tomorrow. I'm open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I might work half a day Thursday, and then I'm taking the day off Friday because I got my cousins coming in.
That's cool.
Cool.
You do it. Work it.
I'll schedule with you, Mike.
All right, Mark. Thanks.
Well, there's your committee right there. But we'll talk about it at the retreat. Speakers Bureau, I haven't done anything on it. I'm totally worthless on that. I'm sorry. So we'll move on. Texas Tree Trails. We've lost Steve, but he said he did have an update. So there's been
You didn't lose me. I'm still here.
Oh, where there? Oh, shoot. I'm looking down here. There you are, Steve. Now, what do you have to tell us?
Yeah. I was going to mention that, as some of you may know, our webmaster for over 20 years that helped us start the site, his health is kind of declining. So we've made an effort. We've reached out and found 3 other people now that are willing to help with the website to keep it up, keep it running, keep it up to date, work on the champion trees. I don't think any of them are willing to go out and measure them, which is something we still need. Susan, if you're teaching your shade keepers, then be sure you teach them how to measure these trees for champion status, which would help the tree trails and the Forest Service people as well if we have those people trained.
I have one that will assist. And
Good.
I'll
We had a couple about 10 years ago from Cross Timbers that measured hundreds of trees here locally over time. So we really need the help. I've got one volunteer that's working with me, and that's about it right now.
his name is Chris, so I'll have him contact you directly.
That'd be great. We'd love to have the help, and Courtney may have some more to do out in Fort Worth as well. I haven't talked to him recently, but he may have some in Fort Worth. We've got plenty in Dallas. I've got 70 or 80 still, 60 or 70 more to do in the Dallas area. So there's quite a few left. The other thing I was going to mention, if somebody has several other people that are willing to join the board, I don't have to be on the board. I was willing to do that to fill in for Dennis Hopper. But I volunteer for a lot of other groups already. So if you've got some people that want to be on the board,
Yes,
I'd be
sir.
happy to step down.
Okay, Steve.
And that's all I got.
Okay, well, that's good. Working on. I'm glad that you have people to assist. That is
One of them has a lot of experience at dealing with websites from years ago. The other one was a group of people that helped us with the Historic Tree Coalition website a number of years ago. The company name that they work for is called Paravita Solutions, and it's a guy named Bruce Balenci that I met many years ago at a Master Naturalist event, and found out what he did, asked him for help with the Historic Tree Coalition. So he really helped us to get that site up and running and doing quite well. I asked him for help more recently because of Doug's health, and he stepped up and given us somebody that would help, and then the guy that was helping, his wife joined in. So I'm pretty excited to have more people to fill in. Doug Pearson has been running that site for over 20 years. He put it together and really made it happen to begin with. So really pleased to have some help to keep it running.
That's awesome. I mean, really.
Say, Sec, I have a question. Steve, do you have a map of like where those trees are located that you still need measured?
We don't have a map. I've got a spreadsheet of all the trees
Spreadsheet.
that need to be
Okay.
measured, of course.
Okay. Can you send that out to us?
The entire spreadsheet?
Yeah. Or is that on the website?
No, it's not on the website. It's a spreadsheet that we created, and I have to look at it more closely because some of these are private properties where people do not want their names and addresses and things to be distributed. So
Yeah.
Whatever got on the property.
yeah, I'd have to go back and look at which spreadsheets I have and which ones we can actually send out. There are, or were at least, some trees in Plano, if you wanted to know, Mark. So there's some up in Plano, Allen and McKinney area as well, I'm sure.
I could probably get to some of those pretty easily.
That'd be great. It's a lot of fun. The only problem that we run into is people forget that they have a champion tree. And in some cases, quite a few cases, people have sold the property to somebody else.
Yeah.
So we show up to measure the tree and they have no idea who we are and they think I'm out there to sell them something. And so it can be a little bit of a struggle just letting them know who we are, what we're doing, that they have a champion tree and its importance and things like that. But it is a lot of fun. Josh Good had measured 2 or 3 of them before he left. He was still going to try to send those along to me wherever he is. I haven't heard back from him, but he was kind of like me, you know, it's a lot of fun. And a lot of times the people are really excited that they have a champion tree. Some of them put it on the website. They want people to come and look at their trees. So
Right.
other people's it's more private. They don't want anybody to know where the tree is or anything else, only that it exists.
Right.
But what's
What
interesting
numbers
is you'll find a lot of unique species on the champion tree list that people are not even aware exist or that they'll even grow here.
When we went on that Cross Timbers, we went on a 3-day tree tour, and there were like, I don't know, a bunch of urban foresters with us, and we couldn't get on this one piece of property without Pete Smith, period. And that was the biggest bald cypress I've ever seen in my life. It was right on the Frio River. But nobody else in the Forest Service could get on that property. So I always wonder if they lost access when Pete left. Some people are, you know, they don't want you. So thank you, Steve. And Mark's our Texas representative, I mean TBUFC representative to their Texas Urban Forestry Council, and they only meet once a year, and that goes through, what's his name, Mike? Over Community Forestry.
Mac's in charge of that, and
Mac
he's
Brown.
Mac is in charge of that, and that's Mac Martin, and he said that
Martin.
he's looking at starting that first part of next year.
And then apparently Mike has been working with all these cities, probably below Mike. I don't know which ones, but Mark and he are gonna go out next week and hit a lot of these that are in this list. You know, y'all want me to give you-
It's just, they're not all in that list. It's just the six I mentioned, a while ago.
Okay,
Commerce, really right now, I think it's Terrell and Corsicana are the ones we're primarily focused on. And then if we could have time to hit Commerce, Gainesville, Kaufman, or Seagoville, then we'll do that. But those are the top priority communities that they pulled up down in College Station as ones to look at.
awesome. I'll update this list. All right, so our next meeting is January, well, that's not in there, 19th. And it's Zoom and in person at the infamous Arroyo's, am I saying that, Arroyo's? Mexican restaurant in Richardson at 2701 Custer Parkway. Dinner provided for members. Cost is at the door is $20 and you get a free membership. Unless you're a member. So before we leave, I have a couple of things that really weren't on the agenda but came up.
I got one question.
Uh-huh.
Did we ever send Steve Sloan his membership?
Mike's gonna do that. We just discussed it before the meeting.
Okay, all right.
We
Thanks,
just
Mike.
needed his name and contact
I
information.
thought I sent the
May have. We'll check and
information.
see though. But yes, that was top thing to get done. It would be a Christmas present. I was gonna write a nice letter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then a young lady, Haley Anderson, I guess it's a lady, I don't know. But she's a PhD student with the Department of Politics and International Affairs at Northern University. She's a visiting graduate student, School of Politics, International Affairs from Princeton University. And she has, since I attended that training, she said that she's reaching out for us to join into an environmental nonprofit. She's exploring the relationship between organizational resources and organizational activities. And next week, so it'll be a survey. It's a research project. And so what they're trying to do is find out the relationship between organizational resources and organizational activities. So they're trying to find out what kind of impact we have. I think we should assist her, so I'll reach out to her. And there's a meeting and I can send it to everyone that is interested. Okay. Anyone interested in taking that survey? Well, I'm gonna do it because I've done this before when I worked for Grand Prix. Kids would reach out all the time and you help them. And that's the type of thing that we do. And then the other thing was, please, but we see several people blog back are on. So we need board members to re-up, and we need a couple of replacements. So everybody send me their suggestions by email. Blake,
Will do.
10-4. Welcome, Jim. Well, it's almost 1 o'clock. Is everybody happy? And you know where we're
Yes.
going for our next meeting? On January 19th. to Arroyo's 2701 Custer Parkway, Richardson, Texas.
I think it's called Frankie's. Or is that a
Oh,
different
they
day?
changed their name.
Uh,
Because they got, I read that they got mixed up
okay.
with the chain. And
Yeah.
what'd you say?
Okay.
They're part of another chain?
No, they've only got 2 restaurants. I know the owner.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's a good buddy of mine.
Yeah, that's what Mike said. They had 2 sites. So
Yeah.
we're on target with that address. And so we'll have some door prizes and we're gonna have fun, but we have work to do too. We have to elect the board. And then we need to, I'm gonna check bylaws. We may have bylaw change, but we need to get all that out ASAP. Okay?
I got a quick question, Susan, about
sir.
that. If we're electing in January, if there are new people coming on board, are they going to be invited to the meeting or no?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't
Are they
know.
members? They can't be
Yeah.
board members if they're not members.
Right,
And
Right. Okay.
like, if they're members, they should get an invitation.
okay, perfect.
They
Well-
might not get a personal, they'll get a personal one from me if they'll become a board member.
Perfect.
This is Mike. Can I add one more thing before we leave? I've just been kind of looking online. Steve, you mentioned the list of historic trees out there and keeping that website up and things like that. What I was doing here last part of the meeting is trying to tie that to see if something like that would qualify for one of these grants. And one of these grants is Tree City USA and Growth Awards. And on the Arbor Day Foundation, the website, if you go, there's a whole list of like 50 different things you can do for a growth award. And then down towards the bottom, they've got ones that say like tree protection, tree rescue, land stewardship, that type of thing. There might be others, but I just kind of did a quick glance at it. So, if you had some trees that in this list that fell in a particular community, we could look at that, try to coax that to fit
Points.
convert it to fit a grant, and then let the city know that we're going to send this proposal out and try to get a grant to help bolster that effort, something like that.
Are you talking about a grant to help with the website or to help get people to go out and measure them?
Both, that whole effort you're describing.
Okay, that's what the purpose of having these other 3 volunteers help was to have volunteers basically managing the website. And I know to the novice that just goes to the site, it doesn't look like it's very complex, but it is. Just the size of the site is over 2 terabytes in size just because of all the photographs alone. So it's quite a bit to manage, and we've been trying to do it with volunteers. Grants would be a consideration. I appreciate you thinking about it. It would partly depend on the amount. Past Forest Service grants, first one we got was for the Historic Tree Coalition for a few years. We oftentimes got a $10,000 grant, but we also found out that we've probably spent $2,000 or $3,000 of our time just complying with all the paperwork and all the requirements and all the other things like that. So
Exactly. Someone has to administer it.
Yeah, the grant I'm looking at here says Tree City USA and Growth Awards, up to 10 awards for up to $10,000 each. So if you had this whole effort with the website, and it overlapped 5 different communities. And each community was a Tree City USA, and they needed a growth award. And this qualified for one, then you're looking at 50 grand.
Okay, I see what you're saying, and I guess we can talk further about it sometime outside of the meeting. It would be basically a grant that would help the cities, but the Texas Tree Trails is all of North Texas, which is like 16 counties and an awful lot of cities as well.
They only have 10, but if we had 10 communities that we used for that, then that would be equal 100,000.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of money, and it'd sure be worth it to those cities.
The grants are statewide.
Yeah, I like the idea. And Mark, you had mentioned a spreadsheet. I can look at the spreadsheet and maybe come up with one for Plano, Richardson, and Allen, maybe McKinney, and build you a specific spreadsheet. If you think you have the time, Mark, I can send it over to you.
Yeah, please.
Good.
Awesome, guys. Keep it working. Anything else, guys, that you want to add? We have a lot of phone work to do between now and our next meeting, so reach out to as many people as you can. We're gonna have a great annual meeting, and I appreciate your attending in December. Is everybody happy?
December to remember.
December to remember. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful. And it's 101, so we're overtime.
I motion to end the meeting.
Oh, yes, a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I'll second.
Third.
Fourth. Well, thank you.